Hello, everyone, and welcome to this sort of extraordinary episode of GeoSpace. I'm Mohammed Salih, your host. Really glad to have you with us today. On GeoSpace, we explore the fast changing landscape of Middle Eastern geopolitics, from shifting power dynamics and regional rivalries to the big picture strategies of global players. I'm really glad to be joined today by Giran Ozcan, the executive director of the Kurdish Peace Institute in Washington, DC, and the former representative of Turkey's pro Kurdish People's Democratic Party, or the HDP, to Washington. We will be diving into the latest developments surrounding the peace efforts between Turkey and the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. Just yesterday, as you might know, on May 12th, the PKK announced that it would disband and lay down arms 47 years after its founding. That's a huge declaration. We will talk about how this will play out in practice and what it could mean for Kurds, for Turkey, and for the wider region. You can find solid reporting and opinion pieces on this development over at the New Region's website, including a column by yours truly. Before we get started, a quick heads up: we will go about for we will go for about an hour, roughly 45 minutes of conversation, followed by your questions. Feel free to send them in as replies to this post or request the mic if you'd like to jump in. And just a reminder that after each live episode, we turn the conversation into a podcast. You can find it on the New Regions website under the Watch section, as well as on our YouTube and SoundCloud channels, usually by the end of the following day. Gran, I'm really glad to have you with us today on this space and podcast. Uh, it's a pretty exciting moment in regional politics. We have got the PKK Turkey situation unfolding with major implications for the Kurds and the broader dynamics that it would entail in Syria and the rest of the region. And we have also got President Trump's visit to the Gulf and the news coming out of there today, including the removal or the possible removal of the sanctions on Syria. But back to our topic, Gran. What does this declaration by the PKK to dissolve itself actually mean in the broader context of the party's history, the Kurdish people's experience in Turkey, and the region? It seems to be a pretty big deal, isn't it?
I mean, I would definitely say it's a pretty big deal, to the point where, I mean, it's a momentous occasion, and a lot of people have described it as the end of an era, and it definitely marks the end of one, and a lot of people, including members of the PKK, have also defined it as the beginning of a new era. And we'll see how that unfolds, I'm sure, in the next few days and weeks. But I think to respond to your question, we do need to go back in history a little bit, because one of the things that to be honest, why we set out with Kurdish Peace Institute is to fill a void where understanding of Kurdish dynamics, and specifically the PKK, was very lacking in capitals like Washington DC, or Western capitals in general. The Kurdish cause, the Kurdish issue, specifically the PKK, has largely been a taboo for research circles. It's always been a policy heading, but when it comes to research and analysis and actually understanding the dynamics of the PKK, there has been a significant lack of whether you would call it interest or just any kind of effort on that front. That's why I think we do need to go back into the history of the movement a little bit to understand why the announcement that came yesterday was such a momentous one, and even to describe what it actually means. We need to go back. And when Öcalan started organizing around the principle Kurdistan is a colony all the way back in 1973, 1974. He started with a small group of university students that consisted actually of both Kurds and Turks. And this was in a time when, there was no mention of Kurdishness. Kurdishness was effectively banned in all public spheres inside the borders of Turkey. Organizing Kurdish political demands, articulating them, could mean a death sentence back then. So when Öcalan first started organizing in the early to mid 70s, he did so uh, primarily at his own university. This spread to other universities in the Turkish capital, Ankara. And after a few years of forming his nucleus group, this moved on to the more eastern cities, the more the Kurdish dominated cities in Turkey, and the organization grew as an ideological movement that was now organizing at a grassroots level in Kurdish cities in Turkey. Up until 1984, the PKK never organized militarily. This was, the PKK as a military presence came about almost 10 years after its organizational groundwork, the organizational roots of the movement had started. So within those first 10 years, though, the PKK lost many of its cadres to extrajudicial killings. Hundreds, if not thousands, were already in Turkish prisons being tortured to death before the PKK even shot a single bullet. So when the PKK, after almost 52 years of struggle, announces the end of the military aspect of its resistance, one definitely needs to see the history that this wasn't a military enterprise from the beginning, and it's not going to end as a military enterprise either. So, seeing that military component of the PKK as a transitional phase of opening up political space to voice the demands that the PKK has organized around was probably one of the fundamental goals of the armed campaign in itself. And so yesterday's announcement is a recognition by the PKK that what it set out to do, what it originally organized around, the ideas that it originally organized around, no longer need military assistance. And I think as a result of that recognition, the movement made this announcement and is now moving on to the next phase of its organizational existence.
Right. Well, based on the excellent context that you just provided and the declaration by PKK's Congress, what does this declaration mean in actual practical terms when the party says that it is going to dissolve itself? And you also use the term movement, which is I would assume broader than the PKK here. Does it mean that the PKK, as it has existed so far, is going to disappear from the political scene in Turkey? Or does it mean that the group is going to transform into a political movement, or is it going to just let the politically active movement inside Turkey in the form of the DEM party at the moment, to sort of take up the banner from here on? What does that declaration mean in terms of the continuity of the Kurdish struggle inside Turkey and Kurdish political activism inside Turkey?
Mohammed, if I'm being totally honest, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And I think anyone that is even trying to answer that question right now isn't really doing much other than speculating. Because one of the things that have really taken my interest the most about this whole process is how tight-lipped the whole thing has been handled. I mean, we have a previous attempt all the way back in 2013. Between 2013 and 2015, there was a previous attempt at negotiations. During that time, many aspects of the negotiations, many meetings were leaked to the media, and the whole process, it seemed, was conducted publicly, and the fallout ultimately was very public and very bloody, if I may add. This time around, however, we've had almost no leaks whatsoever as to what the negotiations are. Are there any negotiations? In itself has been something contentious, with the government saying that no negotiations have been conducted to get the PKK to make this announcement. But as someone that has spent his whole life trying to understand this movement, trying to understand the dynamics of this whole issue, an organization that has existed for half a century and has proven itself militarily capable to go toe to toe with the second largest army inside NATO. And in 2025, after decades of resistance, even after all of the technological advancements that the Turkish military industrial complex has achieved, it would seem pretty illogical and very out of character for the PKK to lay down its arms without the expectation that it will be able to pursue its goals through other means. So while we don't know how this is going to unfold, while we don't know what the next steps are in this process, we do know that the PKK believes, and a lot of observers believe, that the ball is squarely in the Turkish government's court. That from here on in, especially after an announcement that the Turkish government itself has been pushing for months now, that they need to take necessary steps in order to enshrine the whole process and ensure that the PKK have made the right decision, essentially, that they have laid down their arms and that they are now able to conduct their political work through other means. And for this to happen, initially, there needs to be certain legal amendments that do not criminalize a lot of the politics that have been conducted by Kurdish politicians in Turkey, with the broad definition of terrorism that the Turkish judiciary can utilize in cracking down on Kurdish politicians and now politicians from across the political spectrum in Turkey. So I think the first thing we can expect is for the government to take some steps in that regard, that there'll be some legal packages that will be pushed through the Turkish parliament, some softening of certain bureaucratic measures that have been utilized in cracking down on Kurdish politicians and any sort of dissent in Turkey. And that's why I think it's going to be a bit of a fluid process that, we might have some ups and downs in the next few weeks and months, but this is something, the statement that was made by the PKK was something very openly and publicly required and demanded by the Turkish government. It's now their turn to take some steps that will lubricate the process going forward.
Grant, that's very interesting that you raised, these expected legal measures. And one thing that, while reading the PKK Congress's declaration or a statement yesterday, stood out for me was exactly this insistence on what they, the declaration termed as a solid and comprehensive, legal framework for this process to basically, achieve its intended results. So, can we say, despite if I may call it the hype, all the hype that we have witnessed over this declaration on the PKK side, that they are sort of trying to make it clear that the implementation of this declaration, i.e., the dissolution of the PKK, is really contingent upon Turkey also taking some concrete and tangible steps on its end.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely a given, not just from the PKK statement, even from Abdullah Öcalan's statement all the way back in February. If the listeners will remember, the statement was read out. Abdullah Öcalan had prepared a written statement for the Imralı delegation, the Dem Party members of parliament who had visited him for this process. He gave them a written statement to read out, which they did. And then, after the statement was read out, a handwritten note by him was read out by the now unfortunately passed away Sırrı Süreyya Önder. And this is the perfect opportunity to commemorate him and all of his efforts for this process. He sadly passed away very recently. But he read out this handwritten note from Öcalan that said that in order for any of the developments to occur, in order for the PKK to take these steps, the government had to take political and legal steps on its end to ensure that the process could move forward in a healthy manner. So, not just from the PKK statement, but from one of the main interlocutors of the whole process, Abdullah Öcalan, he mentioned quite clearly that the onus was on the Turkish government to ensure that this process could be taken to fruition, and it won't just remain as certain statements coming from the PKK. There are a lot of technical issues that are going to have to be dealt with over the next months, maybe even years. I mean, when we look at comparable processes from across the world, a lot of the technical aspects of disarming a movement that has been engaged in combat for more than 40 years, those technical aspects, the getting rid of all of the arms and the logistics of all of this require technical expertise and a lot of time. So creating the legal and political framework for these technical aspects to even be implemented will surely be within the responsibility of the Turkish government. And judging by some of their statements in response to the PKK statement, it does seem that they are well aware of their responsibilities and that some things may move along quite quickly over the next few days and weeks.
What about the actual steps that we should expect from here on, assuming that everything goes according to the plan agreed upon between the negotiators on different sides? What the dissolution of the party of the PKK, is going to look like, and how is Turkey going to, sort of play its part in this process, whether in terms of granting amnesty, to the rank and file of the PKK, the leadership, or easing, the restrictions on PKK's leader, Abdullah Öcalan. What do we know in terms of what is going to unfold when it comes to practical steps from here on?
So I think there are a lot of practical developments that we can point to right now, even after the initial meetings and the statements from Öcalan were made. We've actually seen the practical implications in neighboring Syria, for example. Already from Öcalan's initial initiative and his first statements, his letters that were reportedly sent to both Kandil and the leaders in northeastern Syria, we've seen that initiative in itself have a positive impact on the escalation in northeastern Syria. Up until about 5 weeks ago, we had a significant conflict playing itself out in and around the Tishreen Dam, just outside of Manbij. Um, and Turkish-backed proxies and Turkish-backed forces were attacking SDF regions back then, and these have, in the last few weeks, have died down, and there is relative calm in those areas. There was an agreement that for months looked like wasn't very possible between the SDF and the authorities in Damascus. By all accounts, these all came about as a result of Abdullah Öcalan's initiative and his taking, him taking responsibility for a lot of this, and so. Already, there are some practical steps that we can talk about right now. But as I said earlier, going forward, what this is going to lead to is still very much up for debate, and as a hallmark and a characteristic of this whole process, still very tight-lipped. But there is one other thing that I could highlight right now that indicates a practical step taken on the part of the Turkish state, and that is Abdullah Öcalan's conditions. Two things that have definitely been of interest to me have been Öcalan's ability to communicate with the outside world without having anyone relay messages for him. And the two occasions that this happened, one was the passing away of Sırrı Süreyya Önder. He issued a statement on that day, and the media reported on it immediately. No one knows how that was communicated. There is no publicly available information if anyone had gone to Imralı Island to visit him on that day. That doesn't seem to be the case. So that message came from Imralı in another way. We don't know how that was uh, communicated, but it was ultimately. And then today also, Öcalan issued another statement in response to the PKK Congress, celebrating the Congress, congratulating the PKK leadership on their successful Congress and the decisions that they came to. So on these two occasions, we know that there's no publicly available information as to whether anyone visited Öcalan to pick these statements up from him. So we see that through these measures, through these developments, that some changes have been made revolving around his conditions. There have been some steps taken already. As I said, we don't know in detail as to what these are, but his ability to communicate with the outside world was a very important demand on the Kurdish side, and that seems to be easing, because that has never happened before. We've never had a message from Öcalan, from Imralı, without some sort of visitation.
And let's talk about Kurdish rights here. Everyone expects that there would be some sort of quid pro quo as part of this process, and you already mentioned, expectations of legal and possibly even constitutional changes in Turkey. But in terms of the vision for addressing the long-standing grievances and demands of Kurds for rights in Turkey, which was, the original reason that gave rise to the birth of the PKK. What kind of, sort of changes should we expect in Turkey? Are we, for example, going to see a recognition, whether indirect or directly or indirectly, of Kurdish linguistic rights, or any other sort of measure that would touch upon the longest standing grievances of Kurds in Turkey? What do what do you know or expect to happen in this regard?
So let me start off by saying, I mean, since August 15, 1984, which was the day of the first PKK military attack against a Turkish army base. Since then, whether one believes this is a result of the PKK's armed struggle or not, objectively speaking, the Kurds are in a better place both within the borders of Turkey and in the region. So, I mean, we gave some examples, but today the pro-Kurdish political party in Turkey oscillates between kingmaker in some elections and substantial winners in others. Kurdishness is a mainstream phenomenon in both the cultural and political spheres in Turkey. I mean, people opposed to the PKK might not want to credit them with these developments, but no one can sensibly push back against the organization when it defines itself as the vanguard of progress vis-a-vis the Kurds in Turkey. I mean, add to this the significant gains made by Kurds in Syria as a result of the ideological, I mean, if not military and political framework provided by the PKK and Abdullah Öcalan, then um, practically speaking, you have a political space today for the Kurds that was not present 4 or 5 decades ago. Now, all of these are, some of these are de facto changes. Some of these are just, natural. They're just kind of naturally a part of Turkish social and political fabric, and none of these are enshrined in any way in the constitution. A lot of these can be through a significant rug pull taken back. So I think at this point, a lot of these changes need to be enshrined legally and constitutionally. As of now, still to this day, the Turkish constitution says that every citizen of Turkey is a Turk. Now, in a country like Turkey, something like that, a constitutional amendment like that, requires a lot of groundwork, a lot of political courage and capital, all of which I would say that this process within itself contains. I think, at the very least, on the Kurdish side, there will be an expectation that a lot of these changes, a lot of the progress that we've seen on Kurdish rights in Turkey, become legally and constitutionally guaranteed. And the changes in the PKK indicate that this can now be politically pursued in Turkey, not militarily.
Right. There's an underlying assumption here on the Kurdish side, for these kind of changes to actually take place, the kind of expectation that you raised. The underlying assumption is that there will be enough democratic space in Turkey to allow for meaningful Kurdish political participation. Right. Is that a leap of faith, or is it based on a realistic reading of the political dynamics in Turkey today, especially in light of the really not so positive signs that we are seeing when it comes to Erdogan government's treatment of the main opposition party in Turkey?
Um, Mohammed, firstly, you're right. There is significant democratic backsliding in Turkey. The authoritarian downturn is very clear for everyone to see. I, for one, generally have pushed back against the idea that the struggle for Kurdish rights and the struggle for democracy in Turkey are two separate things. They aren't, and they definitely are not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand together. Um, but you are right in highlighting the crackdown on the CHP and Ekrem İmamoğlu, who was the front runner to be their candidate to face Erdogan in the next presidential elections. Um, but in response to your question, I think seeing the struggle for Kurdish rights, and seeing the struggle to expand the democratic space in Turkey, uh, one doesn't have to be pitted against the other. Um, and I think some people have fallen victim to doing that very recently. Now, I lost the naivety of my youth in trying to see benevolence as a political motive. I mean, political leaders don't engage in things that are not politically expedient for themselves. And we know that one of the reasons that Erdogan is engaging with this issue today is that he will need support to push through a constitutional amendment that will allow him to run in the next presidential elections. Right now, he is term limited, and under the current constitution, cannot run for another term. So that political interest of his has pushed him to a place to engage with this issue. Um, I believe that the PKK and the Kurdish movement in general has laid down political principles and political markers over the last few decades that indicate that their struggle for Kurdish rights is inseparable from their struggle for democracy in Turkey. And no matter how much Erdogan, the AKP, or the opposition party try to separate the Kurdish issue and the fight for democracy in Turkey, uh, I believe the PKK and the Kurdish movement in general have always seen these as inseparable, and their pursuit of Kurdish rights will not move them to a place where they are insensitive to democratic standards in Turkey in general.
I guess, one really important dimension of this whole process, Giran, that you are very well aware of, but tends to be ignored or disregarded in the debate around this issue, especially in the media, is how this PKK declaration in terms of disbanding the group itself, sort of the deeper background to this is that there is a belief on the part of Öcalan in particular that the ground could be laid for a new era of a relationship between Kurds and Turks, within the boundaries of the Republic of Turkey. And Öcalan has been especially quite clear in his messages, in some of his earlier publications, in terms of the relationship between the Kurdish people and the Turkish people in the region being a millennia old. It has been usually in the form of a historical alliance that has benefited both sides throughout this history. And he has tried to portray the history of the Turkish Republic over the past century or so as an aberration in terms of that broader historical pattern. To what extent do you think, that it is realistic to really expect that there is, a space or a possibility or a chance for reconfiguring that historical relationship between Kurds and Turkey, and sort of starting a new era?
I mean, I believe this is a wonderful chance for that to occur. As you quite rightly said, Abdullah Öcalan is not an ethno-nationalist. He comes from a place, and he structured his worldview around the emancipation of humanity in general. This is a fundamental pillar of his worldview, and he believes that no people in the region, no ethnicity in the region can be free when others are being suppressed. And that's why his worldview and the political structures that have emerged from that worldview, whether it's the pro-Kurdish political party inside Turkey, whether it's the autonomous administration in northeastern Syria. You can see it in all of these structures where there is a multi-ethnic, multi-faith aspect to their organizing. And Öcalan's idea of freedom encompasses all of these. And it's not just for Turks and Kurds, as we see in northeastern Syria, ranging from Armenians, Arabs, Syriacs. All of these segments of society are able to come together under political structures that have been born out of Öcalan's worldview. According to Öcalan, in his worldview, the Middle East, especially the Middle East, where, the cradle of civilization, where all of these ethnicities, faiths call home, none of these, even if you are an overwhelming majority like the Arabs, no one is truly free until everyone is truly free. And that's why Abdullah Öcalan has a different approach to national liberation than a lot of national liberation leaders of both this and last century. And so while restructuring Turkish Kurdish relations, Abdullah Öcalan doesn't just stay there. He goes beyond that. He has primarily a regional view and then a global one. But for the region, he believes that every single ethnicity and faith that exists in our region, as I said, from Arabs to Jews to Kurds to Turks, Persians, all of them can live freely together. And he spends his time and energy on thinking about political structures that can enable that can enhance that, and that can make sure that all of these ethnicities and faiths can thrive. And he has structured his own concepts like democratic confederalism, and that, I'm sure, in the transformation and the evolution of the PKK, whatever political platform that replaces or emerges from the disbandment of the PKK will pursue the emancipation of these peoples in accordance with Öcalan's worldview. So yeah, I think the restructuring of relations between the Turks and Kurds inside Turkey is a fundamental pillar of solving the Kurdish issue, but also making Turkey a more democratic country. And that will no doubt open the path for prosperity for all of the peoples of Turkey.
And what about the other side? In terms of, who is in power in Ankara, do you think that the ideological orientation of the party in power in Ankara matters to, make this effort toward peace, realistic and, as something that could bear fruit? The party that we have in power today in Turkey, the Justice and Development Party of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has Islamist orientations in some shape or form. And do you think that that by any chance complements this ideological orientation of the PKK and the broader Kurdish movement in Turkey in terms of realizing the urgency or the need for some sort of a peaceful breakthrough in the relationship between Kurds and Turks within the borders of the Republic of Turkey?
So I think, as I mentioned in my earlier answer, political expedience, more than anything else, has enabled this process. But I would be dismissive, I think, of a lot of my own research and understanding of these issues if I said that ideology did not play a part. So, of course, ideology plays a part, and especially in a country like Turkey. Erdogan and the tradition and the ideological background that he comes from is has traditionally and historically been an ideology that has been suppressed, brutally suppressed, actually, in the history of the Turkish Republic. So, coming from a tradition, a political background that is all too familiar with brutal suppression in the history of the Turkish Republic, may have opened him up or may have increased his empathy at certain levels towards the plight of the Kurds. Um, but I don't think it's a driving factor of his approach to this issue right now, because having said that, some of the most some of the bloodiest periods in Turkey's war against the Kurds has been conducted under his leadership. So I do believe that ideology and his ideological background has given him different pathways or different levels and different approaches of understanding to this issue. I'm not going to put my whole belief behind the fact or belief behind the idea that his worldview has somehow um, helped him come to this solution. I do believe it's more practical and political interests rather than spiritual or ideological considerations that have brought him to the table and brought him to negotiate with Abdullah Öcalan and the PKK.
I mentioned the ideological element here, to sort of clarify what I meant, mostly in the sense that by virtue of being, sort of a pro-Islamist figure in Turkish politics, whether that plays any role in terms of setting him apart from the traditional Kemalist, character and outlook of the Turkish Republic that has been, pretty uncompromising and repressive toward the Kurds for the past century. And maybe as someone, or his party as a party that sees a religion, Islam here, as a common thread between Turks and Kurds, they might sort of have been convinced in a way, that thread of common identity between, the Kurdish people and the Turks in Turkey could play a part in terms of bringing the two sides together, and not necessarily, viewing Kurds as some sort of existential threat to the to the survival of the Turkish Republic, just by virtue of being ethnically different from the majority ethnic Turks in Turkey. I know, that's a sort of a complicated issue, and perhaps, something that would require a deeper discussion. But let's move on to another important aspect of this process. When I was speaking to you earlier today about this, and you also mentioned this at the beginning of this space, was how, this process has been by and large tight-lipped. A lot of people would call it non-transparent. Do you think, that element of being not so much, the details not being so much publicly available and known, has helped in any way with the, with how this process has reached the point that it has, and could, possibly help, with the success of this process in the future?
Yes. Now, I know this is going to come across as a little contentious, but the fact that this has been a very tight-lipped process has probably helped the process and its relative success. As someone who followed the last significant negotiations between the PKK and the Turkish government back in 2013, 2015, the amount of leaks and the amount of just publicly available information as to what was being discussed probably helped derail that process. And so it does seem on both sides actually that a very tight knit, very limited number of people were working on this and have been the main interlocutors for each side. And that's why I've simply not been able to respond to some of your questions as to how this is going to play out or what the next steps are in the next few weeks and months. And so we are really waiting on actions, specifically now from the government, seeing as the PKK has done what it promised, to gauge where this ultimately goes. So the way this has been handled, it does seem that the Turkish government has either taken certain lessons from the previous failed attempts, or that it's getting some significant advice from some sort of consultancy firm somewhere. But there is a visible and significant difference between how it has handled the negotiations this time compared to the last failed attempt.
Thank you, Grant. Just a note to our audiences that they can, ask their questions, and if any of you would like to request the mic, you can, and my colleagues will make it possible for you to ask your questions. I've already received a number of questions in writing, and one of them ties very well with what you just said, Grant. It's asking, why is neither party willing to accept a mediator? Even Switzerland offered this role. I'm not sure if that would be interesting to confirm. So, can you comment on that?
I mean, the PKK has traditionally been very vocal about bringing in third parties to observe any kind of process between itself and the Turkish government. As you are very well aware, the two sides have very little trust for each other, and actually, understandably so. But I do believe that the Turkish government this time and last time, they've never had any interest in having a third party observer. And this, in my mind, is a bit of a red flag. And I do feel that a third party would benefit the process going forward, and definitely help the ultimate success of this process. But as I said, the Turkish government is reluctant to allow any other third party to observe the way it is conducting the process. And as I said again, the Kurdish side has always been open to that and has on multiple occasions recommended either the United Nations or European countries to be a party to these negotiations.
And what about Syria, Grant? So, how will Turkey's politics? This is one of the other questions. How will Turkey's politics towards Syrian Kurds change, especially, following this recent declaration by the PKK?
So to some degree, it's already changed. As I said, the fighting at the very least, which was not only conducted by Turkish-backed forces, but directly by Turkish air forces. There were regular, almost daily bombardments by the Turkish army in northeastern Syria up until, as I said, a few weeks ago. So this has already changed. Hopefully for permanently changed. Nobody wants to see a return to fighting there. And going forward, even though we're still seeing very harsh statements by Turkish officials towards the administration, the autonomous administration in northeastern Syria. I do believe that there is some degree of acceptance to that structure and the Kurds there having some sort of say in the future Syria, to the point where certain Turkish government officials have, for the first time, referred to the SDF as just the SDF. Rhetorically, that is a change that isn't lost on observers of this issue. Whereas previously there was a criminalization of the SDF. Now they can mention the SDF without mentioning the PKK, and seem to have accepted the framework that was agreed between General Mazloum of the SDF and Ahmed al-Shara in Damascus. So while as of now certain changes have been observed, it's going to be very interesting to see how Turkey reacts and manages the developments inside Syria. They see themselves as a very invested party, but hopefully, as things change inside Turkey, they will have positive implications for Turkey's perspective and perception of Kurdish desires and demands in Syria.
Another question that we have, and I think it's on the minds of many people who are watching this process, is the question of mutual will and the political climate. So, what could truly guarantee the PKK's disarmament and lasting peace negotiations in Turkey? And on the Turkish side, what would ensure that the Turkish state adheres to and does not undermine the peace process?
Well, firstly, Turkey needs to cease its military operations against the PKK. This is an organization that has now said that it ceased all military operations and ended its armed campaign against the Turkish state. So Turkey, at the very least, has to immediately cease its military operations against the PKK too. I mean, can you believe it? The PKK had to conduct its Congress where everyone knew that they were going to declare the end of their military campaign. Even that Congress was conducted under Turkish fire. Turkish operations and Turkish air bombardments continued throughout that whole process. And still to this day, Turkish military operations inside the Kurdistan region in Iraq are continuing. So that needs to stop as soon as possible. And that doesn't even require any legal amendments. That can be done straight away and needs to be done straight away to show the PKK and its fighters that they don't need to defend themselves militarily. So that, I would say, is an immediate thing, immediate step that can be taken. And I think on the other side, the Turkish government is probably expecting the PKK to formalize and take steps that show that they are disbanding. But as we talked about earlier, that is a technical issue, and I'm sure the Turkish state on its end is preparing commissions, technical commissions, and technical delegations that will be able to observe and pursue those processes that will continue and may have even already started.
What about how this process will, affect Turkey's regional standing and role, especially, keeping in mind that the regional geopolitics has changed quite significantly in the aftermath of the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel and the subsequent conflict in Gaza and the rest of the region. How is peace with the PKK and also peace with with the SDF and Kurds in Syria going to affect Turkey's regional standing and role, and how is it also going to affect, the Kurdish position in the region?
Well, I think for Turkey, Turkey has, over the last, I would say, 15 years, is known both in the region and globally as a destabilizing force. Because of its actions and operations and invasions of neighboring countries, Turkey has been seen as an occupying country, and a country that has not thought twice about invading neighboring countries. And that has definitely tarnished its regional but global standing too. I mean, I live in the US, and when you mention Turkey, when you mention Erdogan, people lift an eyebrow and see him as an authoritarian figure that hasn't had any issue in destabilizing both his own country but neighboring countries too. So the premise that the Turkish government and the Turkish state has used to do all these destabilizing interventions has been the PKK. Now that is being taken off the table. Turkey no longer has the excuse of going after the PKK, and so this hopefully will lead to it moderating its regional behavior, its destabilizing behavior. So, if that happens, if Turkey sees this as an opportunity to be a more stabilizing actor in the region, then this will obviously have a positive impact on its regional and global standing. Yeah, I think as one retired Turkish general complained about on Turkish media very recently, he was very upset by the PKK making this announcement because it had taken away Turkey's excuse to invade these countries. Now, obviously, if you have any kind of benevolent intentions, that is not a position one can take. And so, yes, I believe that this is going to have a positive impact on Turkey's standing if it ultimately fulfills its responsibilities and pursues this process to its conclusion.
Well, Giran, you know very well that the 20th century was a painful century for the Kurds in the region. The Greater Kurdistan was divided among four different states in the aftermath of the World War I, and Kurds basically were deprived of their political and cultural rights in these countries for quite a long time, especially in Turkey and in Syria. And do you think that a peace between the PKK and a new Turkey that is able to accept Kurds as equal citizens, grants them their cultural and political rights, and also recognizes the existence and the rights of Kurds in other places such as Syria, where Turkey has major influence. Do you think all of this could possibly mean that the Kurds are entering the 21st century? We are already a quarter of century into the 21st century, but do you think this could help turn a new page for the Kurds and make the 21st century different?
I absolutely do. I mean, since the turn of the century, firstly, the Kurds in Iraq, in southern Kurdistan, have been able to establish a platform for themselves where they are able to conduct. I mean, firstly, they're able to govern themselves to a certain degree and conduct international engagements and diplomacy with both regional states and global powerhouses, just like the US. So that's one platform that the Kurds have had for almost the last quarter century. Um, right now in Syria, over the last almost 15 years, the Kurds are institutionalizing and establishing themselves there. They have been able to carry out a military campaign that ended in the territorial defeat of ISIS's caliphate. They did this partnered with 80 countries as part of the coalition to fight ISIS that the US led. Even to this day, the US is on the ground side by side with its SDF partners conducting their de-ISIS campaign. So for the Kurds, there are four parts of Kurdistan, and this means that two out of the four, as of now, have established themselves to a certain degree and have become legitimate institutions in the region. These are institutionalized parts of Kurdistan that are able to handle and initiate relations with multiple state actors in the region, and as I said, global actors too. So we're now on the path to the third part of Kurdistan, and actually the biggest part of Kurdistan, which falls within the national borders of Turkey, where they are now able to establish a legitimate platform for themselves there too. And I believe that regional states, especially, are recognizing this. They are seeing that the Kurds are no longer the underground, unspoken nation of the Middle East, but an up and coming nation that is in a maybe unorthodox way, not necessarily by the creation of an independent nation state, but by the creation of alternative institutions and establishments and governance models the nonetheless regional actors want to engage with. So I do believe that the 21st century and the first quarter of that century has been a time in which the Kurds have enhanced their regional standing, and the trajectory as of today is one that indicates that will continue, that will strengthen, and the Kurds will become, just like most other ethnicities in the world, will become a dignified nation amongst other nations.
Well, on that note, let's bring this episode of GeoSpace to an end. Thank you so much, Grant, for your insights and for being with us on short notice for this episode of GeoSpace and helping shed on light, help shed light on the fascinating developments that we are seeing in terms of the peace efforts between Turkey and the PKK. And just a reminder to our audiences that after this live session, this episode will be repackaged as a podcast and published on the New Regions website under the Watch section and on the New Regions YouTube channel and SoundCloud channel by tomorrow's end. And thank you to our audiences for being with us as well. See you in 2 weeks for the next episode of GeoSpace.